The brass on my shoulders felt a lot heavier than it did when I graduated from the academy. It's funny how a little bit of silver and gold can feel like lead when your superior officer's trying to bury you. Major Vance didn't just dislike me. He viewed my existence as a clerical error he was determined to correct. When a shipment of sensitive tech went missing from the motor pool under my watch, he didn't look for the thief, he looked at me. He fabricated the paper trail, found the missing components in my locker, and made sure my discharge was as loud and humiliating as possible. I was stripped of my rank, fined 6 months' pay, and kicked out with a bad conduct stamp that felt like a brand on my forehead. I spent a year working security at a dead-end warehouse, watching my savings evaporate while Vance likely polished his medals. Then, the world turned. 2 years later, I was sitting in my cramped apartment when the knock came. It wasn't the police. It was Vance's private attorney. It turned out Vance had been caught up in a massive procurement scandal one he actually wasn't guilty of. He was being framed for a multi-million-dollar kickback scheme by the general who had been his own mentor. The only thing that could save him, a set of encrypted logs from a specific mobile terminal used during the very same month he had me ousted. And here was the kicker. I was the only person who had ever made a backup. I hadn't done it for him. I'd done it because I was a paranoid junior officer who documented everything to protect myself. I was the only witness who could prove he was miles away from the terminal when the fraudulent signatures were made. Vance requested a private meeting at a high-end hotel. He looked smaller than I remembered. Grayer, Lieutenant, he started, his voice cracking. I know things ended poorly, but for the sake of the service, for justice, I need those logs. I know you have them. It's just Mr. Vance, I said, leaning back. Justice is an expensive hobby. I don't care about the service. The service watched you tear my life apart and cheered. He looked desperate. I can get your record cleared. I can talk to the board. Not enough, I said. I've calculated the interest on my lost career, the emotional toll of the shame you heaped on my family, the legal fees I'll need to officially scrub my name. And then there's the silence fee for the fact that I'm the only one holding your get-out-of-jail-free card. The fluorescent lights in the hotel suite hummed with a low, clinical buzz. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, while Major Vance paced the carpet like a caged animal. 2 years ago, he'd stood on a parade deck and stripped me of my pride in front of the entire battalion. Now, he was sweating through a silk suit that cost more than my car. You have 10 minutes, Elias, he snapped, his voice still carrying that grating command authority. I'm not here to reminisce. I'm here for the drive. I didn't move. I didn't even look at it. I just pulled a small silver USB from my pocket and rolled it over my knuckles. You're in a lot of trouble, Vance. The general didn't just throw you under the bus. He parked it on top of you. Those procurement logs are the only thing that proves he didn't sign off on the $12 million diversion. Vance stopped pacing. His face turned a shade of mottled purple. I am a decorated officer. You will hand over that evidence immediately. It is government property, and I will have you charged with obstruction if you don't. Charged? I laughed, finally looking at him. The sound was cold. With what? I'm a civilian. You made sure of that. You burned my career to hide your own incompetence back in the motor pool. Now, the bridge you burned is the only way across the river. He lunged forward, slamming his hands on the table between us. You little parasite. You think you can blackmail me? I'll have the MPs at your door before you reach the lot. Give me the drive, or I'll ensure you spend the next decade in a cell next to mine. I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding a single sheet of paper toward him. It wasn't the logs. It was a printout of his personal offshore investment portfolio, the one he'd been hiding from the IRS and the DOD for years. The MPs aren't coming, Vance. Because if they do, I'm not just handing them the logs, I'm handing them this. I don't just have the evidence that saves you. I have the evidence that ruins you in a completely different way. Vance's breath hitched, the bravado evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, frightened old man. He looked at the numbers on the page, $680,000. It was his retirement, his safety net, his blood money. Elias, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. It's Mr. Thorne, he said, walking past him. The view showed the Washington Monument piercing the gray sky, and I don't recall giving you permission to use my first name. Vance exhaled. He actually moved toward me, reaching out as if to hug his savior. Thank God you have to turn them over. For the sake of the cause. Elias, for justice. This will clear my name. I'll be restored. I'll make sure you get a commendation for coming forward. I turned around. The look on my face stopped him dead. I didn't smile. I didn't look heroic. I looked like a creditor who had come to collect a very old debt. Custis, I asked. You want to talk about justice? Where was justice when you put that optic in my trunk? Where was the sake of the cause when you told the board I was a thief and a liar? Vance turned pale. His eyes darted across the pages. How did you? That was your OIC, Vance. You thought I was a kid who didn't know how to audit. I knew about this the day I was discharged. I just waited for the right moment to use it as leverage. The silence in the room was absolute. Vance sank into a plush velvet armchair, his face buried in his hands. The outrage was gone, replaced by the cold realization that I didn't just hold his shield, I held his noose. What do you want? Orchestrated. I've done the math, I said, sitting opposite. I lost 2 years of career progression. I lost my pension. I lost the respect of my family. I've worked for $12 an hour while you lived in a house paid for by the taxpayer. I slid a tablet across the table. It's a secure banking. The logs that save you from the general's frame job cost exactly $600,000. Roughly 90% of what you have in that Cayman account. I also want a signed confession regarding the optics you planted in my car, to be sent to my lawyer and held until my record is expunged. You're robbing me, Vance whispered. I'll be left with nothing. You'll be left with your freedom, I countered, which is more than you gave me. You've 60 seconds to decide if you want to be a broke free man or a wealthy inmate at Leavenworth. I watched his eyes. I watched the pride break. I watched the moment he realized he was no longer a major and I was no longer his subordinate. He reached for the tablet. With a few taps and a facial recognition scan, the transfer was initiated. The send button clicked with a digital chime that sounded like a victory trumpet. He then signed the confession, his hand shaking so much the signature was barely legible. I stood up, took the signed paper, and tossed a small, silver thumb drive onto the table. The logs are on there. They're verified, time-stamped. They'll blow the general out of the water. You'll be the hero of the hour. Vance, a victim of a high-leveled conspiracy. Vance looked at the drive like it was a piece of radioactive waste. You're a monster, Thorn. No, I said, heading to the door. I'm just a very expensive witness. Enjoy your retirement. I hear the economy is tough these days. I walked out of the Willard and into the cool DC rain. My phone buzzed a notification from my bank. The balance had more zeros than I had ever seen in my life within 6 months. The confession was processed, my record was cleared to an honorable discharge, and my rank was retroactively restored. I never went back to the military. I didn't need to. I bought a house on the coast, started a consulting firm, and every morning I have a cup of coffee and think about Major Vance, the man who taught me that in the Army. Information is power, but in the real world, the only thing that matters is who owns the logs.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.